Deploy Llama model. Steps. Step. Install dependencies. Description. Install necessary libraries and tools for deployment. This includes installing Python packages such as Torch, Transformers, Flask, and G-Unicorn. Step. Download Llama model. Description. Download the pre-trained Llama model from the Hugging Face Model Hub or other sources. This involves using the Transformers library to fetch the model and tokenizer. Step. Create Flask application. Description. Set up a Flask application to serve the Llama model. Create a Python file app.py that initializes a Flask server, loads the pre-trained Llama model, and defines an endpoint generate to accept post requests with prompts and return generated responses. Step. Test Flask application locally. Description. Run the Flask application locally to test the deployment. Start the Flask server on your local machine and verify that it responds correctly to post requests. Instructions. Send a post request to HTTP. Localhost 5000 generate with JSON data. Prompt. Your prompt here. Step. Containerize application with Docker. Description. Create a Docker file to containerize the Flask application. Define a Docker file that sets up a Python environment, installs dependencies from a requirements.txt file, copies the Flask application code, and specifies a command to run the application using G-Unicorn. Step. Build Docker image. Description. Build the Docker image for the Flask application. Use the docker build command to build an image based on the Docker file created in the previous step. Step. Run Docker container. Description. Run the Docker container locally to test the deployment. Start a Docker container using the built image and verify that the Flask application operates correctly within the Docker environment. Instructions. Send a post request to HTTP. Localhost 5000 generate with JSON data. Prompt. Your prompt here. Step. Push Docker image to Docker Hub. Description. Tag and push the Docker image to Docker Hub. Tag the locally built Docker image with a repository name and push it to your Docker Hub account. Step. Deploy to cloud provider. Description. Deploy the Docker container to a cloud provider AWS, Azure, GCP. Choose a cloud provider e.g. AWS ECS, Azure Container Instances, Google Cloud Run. Configure a deployment environment, and deploy the Docker image. Instructions. AWS. Create an ECS cluster. Create a task definition for the Docker image. Run the task in the ECS cluster. Azure. Create a resource group. Create a container instance using the Docker image. GCP. Deploy the container image to Cloud Run. Configure service settings and deploy. Step. Monitor and scale application. Description. Set up monitoring and auto-scaling for the deployed application. Use cloud provider monitoring tools e.g. CloudWatch, Azure Monitor, Google Stack Driver, to monitor the application's performance and configure auto-scaling policies based on CPU memory usage or request rate to ensure optimal performance and resource utilization.